You know how sometimes you stumble across something that just makes you stop and rethink things? A real mental puzzle.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's exactly the kind of material we're diving into today. You shared this um, really compelling YouTube video, Biagia by Agrofagum,
Hmm.
and it grapples with some pretty fundamental questions about evil. So we're going to try and pull out the most, let's say, thought-provoking ideas from it for everyone listening.
Yeah, and what immediately grabs you, I think, is the video's central question. It's like, is evil just random bad stuff happening?
Right.
Or could it actually be part of a bigger structure?
Hmm.
Maybe even, a necessary part of the whole universe.
Yeah.
It really forces you to reconsider some basic assumptions.
Okay, so the video sort of kicks off by tackling this common idea, right? The one that says evil is just a glitch, a mistake.
Uh-huh. Like, if we could just get rid of it.
Exactly.
Well,
Boom. Perfect world. But the speaker, he argues that's, well, not quite right. What's the core of his counter-argument there?
well, he basically suggests that view misses a wider perspective, what he calls a transcendent level.
Transcendent level.
Yeah, think of it like trying to understand a chess game. You can't just look at the pieces on the board, right?
Right.
You need to consider the rules, the ultimate goal of the game itself. He sort of hints at this system designed to safeguard created beings, though the specifics aren't really laid out yet at this point.
Okay, that makes sense. Shifting the viewpoint. And this ties into that idea of us being eternal beings, doesn't it? Something easily overlooked in the day-to-day.
Definitely.
How does this eternal aspect connect with the concept of evil in the video?
Well, this brings up the potential for long-term decline, degradation, really.
Okay.
What the speaker illustrates with the idea of vulgar Satanism. If beings have a potentially limitless existence, then the possibility of sort of spiraling downwards
Mm,
into increasingly negative states, that becomes a real concern.
that's a serious possibility.
And the video then presents two contrasting ways beings might navigate this potential for degradation.
Okay, yeah, I remember this. We have these positive teachers, right? These guiding forces trying to steer beings back towards their original, more, let's say, divine state.
Hmm.
But then there are these other ones, the non-divine teachers. They sound a bit more intense. What's their role in this whole framework?
Well, what's fascinating and maybe a bit unsettling is the idea that these non-divine teachers actually benefit from the significant degradation of being.
Benefit. How?
The video proposes that this deep decline, this fall, it generates specific kinds of energies. He briefly touches on the rose of the world concept here, implying there's a more intricate energetic system at play.
So even though they seem like total opposites, the positive guides and these negative ones, the video suggests they ultimately serve a similar purpose. How can that be? It feels like a contradiction.
Yeah, it does at first,
Yeah.
but the underlying idea seems to be that learning happens in different ways. You can learn willingly, guided by positive influences.
Hmm.
Or if you deviate significantly, you might learn through the consequences of your actions.
Yeah.
And that can involve suffering, which might be facilitated by these non-divine teachers.
Ah, I think.
It's kind of like the universe has different teaching styles,
Yeah.
some gentler than others.
And that brings us straight to suffering itself. The video suggests it's not just random pain, but it actually has a function. What's that function, according to the speaker?
He proposes that suffering is a powerful prompt for self-reflection.
Mm.
When things go wrong, really wrong, it often forces us to look inward, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To re-examine our choices, our whole relationship with life.
Yeah, it
It's like a cosmic alarm bell, maybe, urging us to reconsider the path we're on.
Which links back perfectly to remembering our eternal aspect, right?
Exactly.
If our existence isn't just this short blip, then the impact of our choices, well, it stretches far beyond just the present moment. Now, the video mentions this rose of the world idea quite a bit. Can you give us a quick overview of what's relevant from it here?
Sure. So the rose of the world, as the video presents it, is a specific model of the cosmos. Our planet in this model is called Shakar,
Sugar. Okay.
and where we exist, this physical world, is just one layer called Rav, which is what we know as Earth.
Just one layer.
Right. But there are other layers too, more luminous spiritual realms,
Mm-hmm.
then also demonic ones, and even a lower layer, a really dark one. For beings who have fallen so far, they're rejected by both light and darkness.
Wow. Rejected by both.
Yeah, he calls it a karyo, which translates to like a graveyard, kind of
Yeah.
cosmic graveyard.
Okay. And the video touches on why these extremely degraded beings might even exist in that lowest layer. What's the thinking there?
Well, the speaker brings up the idea of freedom of choice, but taken to an absolute extreme. The suggestion is that beings, through their choices over vast periods, can move so far away from the light,
Mm-hmm.
from their source, that they become incompatible even with darkness itself. It really raises profound questions about free will and its consequences.
It does. And this then leads to this rather direct idea
Hmm.
that those who really struggle to find their way back to what's called the path of truth, they need a different kind of instruction.
Mm-hmm.
This is where that concept comes in, evil as teachers for the stupid. That's a pretty blunt way to put it.
It is very direct, yeah. The speaker's argument basically is that for those who are unwilling, or maybe unable, to learn through more gentle means,
Right.
then harsher experiences, potentially facilitated by these negative forces, become, in a sense, necessary. It's a stark way of viewing negativity as a corrective force for those who just won't learn any other way.
It's interesting because the video also briefly connects this to something more mundane, how our modern education system can sometimes, hinder our actual desire to learn. What connection does the speaker draw there?
Well, the suggestion is that when our natural curiosity, our innate desire to learn and understand gets stifled, maybe by rigid systems or just lack of inspiration,
Yeah.
it can have consequences, not just in our social lives, but potentially in our spiritual development too. A lack of that inner drive to learn and grow might, paradoxically, make individuals more susceptible to learning through difficult negative experiences later on.
But it's not all negative forces and difficult lessons out there, right? The video does mention worlds without this demonic influence. Where are these supposed to be?
Yeah, according to the Rose of the World framework he's using, the Orion constellation is given as an example. Worlds that have apparently never experienced demonic influence.
So they exist in a similar sort of layer to us, but without that negative polarity.
That seems to be the idea. But then on the flip side, some worlds in the Antares constellation are described as heavily demonized, existing in a much, much more negative state than Earth.
And where does Earth, or Rav as he called it, fit into this cosmic picture then?
Earth is presented as a kind of middle ground, a borderline world, maybe, but leaning towards the light. It's a place where both positive and negative forces are operating, and both are seen as fulfilling their divine or transcendent functions within this larger system. This duality is portrayed as just a characteristic of our current reality.
So the main thrust here, the takeaway, is that from the speaker's perspective, evil isn't just some random cosmic accident. It actually has a role to play.
Exactly. Especially, he emphasizes, for those who have lost their connection or strayed far from a higher power, the creator, as he puts it.
Right.
And the speaker really stresses that this system, as described, is presented as perhaps the only currently known way to prevent what could otherwise be a never-ending or nearly never-ending state of decline for beings who move too far from their original source.
Okay. Now, the video takes a slightly darker turn when it briefly mentions that, again, this really dark layer. It's described as so negative that apparently even Jesus Christ couldn't access it during his descent into hell. Why bring that up?
Yeah, that's a heavy point. I think that brief mention serves as a really stark reminder within this model of the potential ultimate consequences of extreme degradation. It highlights that there could be levels of negativity that are almost unimaginable, perhaps beyond even significant divine intervention at certain points. And mentioning that seems to prompt the speaker to want to shift gears actually towards a more positive aspect of this whole framework.
Which leads to the next idea presented. Jesus Christ not just as a savior figure, but as the actual planetary logos of Earth. What does that mean within this context? Logos.
Right, the concept of a planetary logos. It refers to the idea of a planet, not just as rock and water, but as a living, conscious entity, an intelligence that encompasses all of its layers, physical, spiritual, the whole deal.
Okay, like Gaia, but maybe more complex.
Sort of, yeah. And Jesus Christ, in this particular framework from the Rose of the World, is presented as the primary divine being associated with our planet. The first among equals, you might say. Essentially, the guiding intelligence or the soul of the entire planet Shakar, including all those different spiritual and even the demonic layers we talked about.
Wow, that's a big concept. And the speaker mentions having a personal, sort of intuitive connection to this idea, right? Even without necessarily subscribing to a rigid belief system. Why highlight that personal feeling?
I think it's to underscore that these ideas, especially from the Rose of the World, aren't being presented as strict, literal, dogmatic beliefs you have to accept wholesale.
Ah,
It's more like They are models, moves, ways of understanding reality that the speaker personally finds intuitively resonant, that feel like they align with something true. He even draws a parallel to some Buddhist perspectives, suggesting these are ways of mapping or making sense of the underlying nature of existence rather than rigid religious doctrines you must follow.
Got it. So as we sort of wrap up this deep dive into the video's main points, what's the core message that really stands out to you?
I think the absolute core message is this perspective that challenges the randomness of evil. Instead of seeing it as just a cosmic accident or a mistake,
Yeah.
it's proposed as a potentially fundamental, maybe even structural part of a larger cosmic framework, particularly, and this is key, for those beings who have drifted away from their connection with a higher power, with their source.
It's definitely a thought-provoking idea, and for some, I imagine, perhaps a disturbing one, this notion that suffering and negative forces might actually serve some kind of corrective or instructive role in the bigger picture.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the implications of thinking this way? For how you understand your own responsibilities, maybe,
Hmm.
or the way you learn and grow from challenges.
Hmm.
And the big question it leaves you with is there a way to gain that wisdom, to evolve, without necessarily experiencing the sharper, harsher lessons of negativity? Can we learn willingly?
Absolutely something to consider, and we really encourage everyone listening to reflect on their own understanding of good and evil. Maybe in light of some of these quite different ideas, it's certainly a perspective that gives you a lot to chew on.